So here's the thing, everybody. You need to understand what is nitric oxide. So we don't have to diagnose anything.
Yep.
What we need to do is the body will heal itself if you give it the right raw materials. Nitric oxide is an odorless, colorless gas produced by the endothelial lining, the one cell thick lining of every blood vessel in the body. And that you prick yourself anywhere and there's a tiny blood vessel there. So when the levels are high, it acts as a uber neurotransmitter so that it will balance serotonin, dopamine, beta endorphin, all the chemicals that the brain makes when it thinks, and also all the chemicals for which people are given psych meds. So what Cardio Miracle does, if you think about it, when you are under stress, nitric oxide goes down. When you're watching the mainstream media, nitric oxide goes down. Every time you're in fight or flight or you're under stress, nitric oxide goes down. So that sense of well-being, which what tonight is about, that sense of well-being plummets. Now, when I wrote The Secret Pleasures of Menopause, there wasn't any supplement available.
There wasn't. I can contest to that.
Yeah. So then when I discovered it, because people kept saying to me, well, how can I get it? And by the way, also, they use it with premature babies. Premature babies breathe nitric oxide. They breathe it, and their lung tissue, which is erectile, by the way, the lung tissue is erectile, and it helps them enormously. And speaking of which, we get a lot of feedback from men that, again, the nitric oxide with erectile tissue is really, really helpful. And by the way, and I'm just, I have to say this because it's one of my favorite lines from Dr. Oz ever. And it is this: the penis is the dipstick of men's health. And it's the beginning of cardiovascular disease. If that's not working properly, it's a sign, it's a signal for cardiovascular problems elsewhere. We're all about going up to the headwaters of health before there's a diagnosis. Now, Stan, you're an elite athlete. Could you tell us about how you discovered Cardio Miracle and what it's done for your performance and all that?
Yes. Thank you, Chris. Great to be with you. Lisa, great to be with you as well. Ironically, so John Hewlett, the formulator, has been a friend of mine for over 20 years. And he had asked me a little over 2 years ago, about 25 months ago, to come and join him to help evangelize Cardio Miracle. This was a couple of months, we were into just before COVID was announced, a few months before that. When John and I got together, I was 1 month out from a conversation of having basically my DNA, the Stan Graham operating manual, read back to me by the DNA company. The chief medical officer, Mansour Mohammed, had said, look, let's do a test on you. Let's read your DNA handbook. Gave me all the good news first, and then said, look, your first red flag, which is a major one, I need to talk to you about your endothelium. I said, wow. What's an endothelium? And right. So he says, well, it's the inner lining of your blood and lymph vasculature. I said, okay, so what's the deal? He says, well, you could have an endothelium that is genetically comprised to make something on the order of the Williams-Sonoma brand, because this stuff acts like a Teflon inside your blood vessels. That's how he described it. It's the Teflon coating inside your blood vessels. So you can get a really nice Teflon from Williams-Sonoma, quality, lasts long, wear and tear is minimal, or you get a dollar store bargain brand, which abrases easily, wears out easily. I'm sorry, you have the bargain, the dollar store bargain basement genetic endothelium. I said, so then he followed up with one question, Chris. He says, so what's your resting heart rate? I said, well, it's 51. And he says, well, that's because you're a freak. You've been training for years, you've eaten well for years, so he knows me very well. He says, but if you were the Stan of an alternate universe, where you're the lawyer that practiced law for 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day, ate fast food, highly processed food, sugar, came home, sat on the couch, watched the news, you'd be dead. because this endothelium of yours would, instead of preventing adhesion of platelets,
Yeah.
of lipids, of cholesterol, of the aggregation of garbage that we accumulate because of toxins, because of what we eat, etc. He said, your endothelium wouldn't be functioning well. You've been able to facilitate a weakness to be a strength. So 1 month later, I said, well, what do I do about it? He says, actually, we don't really have a good solution for this right now.
Yeah.
I said, well, he says, so keep doing what you're doing. You know, within a month, I'm talking to John Hewlett, and I walked into his cabin, and he gave me the study, this third-party peer-reviewed study from Ohio University by Dr. Tadeusz Malinsky. And he says, hey, Stan, here's a study that we had published a few months ago. It was in February of 2020. And I read that study. I took it for a few hours, Chris, and I came back. I said, John, do you have any idea what you have here? Because this study just told me that using Cardio Miracle can rehabilitate my endothelium. Because when the endothelium produces nitric oxide, it cares for itself. It cures injuries that it has. Just like the body's the only thing that cures the body.
Yeah.
So if you give it this particular fuel, this composition of ingredients, there are like 52 ingredients in this thing, then it will reverse endothelial dysfunction. That's a quote. It will reverse endothelial dysfunction. And so I read that report. I was sold. I said, John, I'm in. And since that time, I've read, several hundred studies now on endothelial disease. They're actually, since 2010, I think at the rate, Chris, of 6,000 studies a year done on nitric oxide. 6,000 studies a year on average since 2010 on nitric oxide, this single little molecule. Here's another thing, Chris, since you and I have got to know each other well over the last year and becoming really more familiar with your work on women's hormones,
Right.
estrogens. I've entertained this question a few times since our conversations. Is nitric oxide a hormone?
Interesting.
And so I read up a little bit on that question. And one of the things I discovered was that estrogens increase the synthesis and release of nitric oxide through stimulation of the endothelial nitric oxide synthase molecule and its expression. So think if estrogen is not optimal in the body, it affects the body's ability to express nitric oxide. Then I thought, well, and here's the reason here's the connection link, Chris, between the study that you were doing, that you've done all your life with women's hormones and nitric oxide. Is at one time on one of our conversations, I said, Chris, that the endothelium is the largest organ of the endocrine system.
Whoa.
And then I slowed down and listened to myself. It's the largest organ of the endocrine system. What other organs are involved in the endocrine system?
The thyroid and,
We have the
pineal.
pineal gland, right?
Yep.
The hypothalamus. I mean, the adrenal glands, all these glands that are secreting hormones are part of the endocrine system. So I thought, well, that's fascinating, because if the endothelium, which produces nitric oxide, is part of the largest organ of the endocrine system, how would the lack of nitric oxide production affect the endocrine system?
Yeah. Well, it would change everything. And what do we have with women? And Lisa, you know this. So women have lack of estrogen, they have hot flashes, they get dull hair, breaking fingernails, thyroid problems. Everyone's got thyroid problems. And, there's another product that we're going to talk about, which is a Model Life Praeria Mirifica product that I've been working on for a number of years from a tuber. You got Lisa in in Thailand. I'm telling you, it's like the magic combination. I just had a friend call me and she goes, well, I'm going to go see a new doctor and, I got to still have my estrogen prescription. And I thought to myself, well, I'm very glad that I don't have to have any prescription. I can get what I use just, between Cardio Miracle and Praeria Mirifica, the Amata Life. I also, by the way, I have a amazing vaginal moisturizer, which one of my friends, she calls me up. She goes, oh my God, you've made my husband into my boyfriend. He loves you.
I think
So-
we have a slide on that tuber. Gabe, can you bring up, I think it's slide 6.
Okay, good. And then we also want to show them the slide of endothelium so people can see it, because
Sure.
that's where the plaque is if you don't have it.
Let's take a look, Gabe, at that endothelial slide first. I think that's slide 5, the communication interface, the previous one there.
Yeah.
There we go. There you go.
I love, this one I think is so important for people to see. So that's your fingertip, right? And you see, everybody, that endothelium is everywhere. It's like the blood she goes everywhere. It covers 400 square meters, 6 tennis courts. And the other thing, Stan, when you say, imagine this, because it's a mind bender. We're finding that a lot of what we thought was true in medicine is not true. And if this is the largest endocrine organ in your body, then you got to treat your body as a whole. And that's the beauty of nitric oxide. You get those levels up, then it's going to balance everything else. And so do we have the, let's see, the next slide here. Okay. Okay, so this is Praeria mirifica, and this has been used in Thailand for over 700 years. It means miracle maker. This, by the way, works in men and women. We have a men's formula, and we also have a women's formula. And I went over there to visit it. It's grown in the jungle, and it was right at the base of the mountain where those soccer players, do you remember when the Boy Scout troop went into the cave and all those soccer players were stuck, all those little boys? And it was a miracle that they all came out of there. And then as soon as the last one was rescued, the caves were flooded. I mean, that was a miracle beyond anything. But I was right there at the base in the jungle, looking at this plant, and it's wild crafted by the locals. There are, you got to do it exactly at the right time. It's organic, it's all the rest of it. It's not very well known in the United States, because what do we do in the US? We tend to use only those things that can be patented and made into drugs, but this is naturally occurring. So to me, the combo of the nitric oxide, which is going to balance your hormones, and then the Praeria mirifica. We hear for men, by the way, in our men's product, we hear men saying they don't have to get up at night to go to the bathroom. So I think, again, it's doing some balancing work around the prostate. But Stan, can you tell us, oh, and then I have a vaginal moisturizer of this stuff. And what's so interesting about it is you use it for a while, let's say a couple months, then you don't need to use it anymore. It's like it turns something on and it sort of stays on. I like that. One of the things that I don't like about conventional hormone therapy, if you take conventional hormone therapy, what it does by a feedback loop is it makes your ovaries shut down their production of their own estrogen. And by the way, your ovaries produce hormones, or at least the precursors like the adrenals, for your whole life. And women have been talked out of their ovaries for a long time. 1 in 3 women will have a hysterectomy in this country. The diagnosis a friend calls CPU, chronic persistent uterus. So we really need to be looking at that. But Stan, can you tell us some of the studies that show how long one dose, which is a scoopful of Cardio Miracle, increases your nitric oxide for? Because John's done beautiful work on those studies. So how long does it last,
Yes, well, yeah, the first study as I mentioned before, that was done by Dr. Malinsky, who actually wrote a seminal research on vitamin D, as well as its combination with nitric oxide. He's at Ohio University. The first study published in February of 2020 in Pharmacognosy Research, his study found that human endothelial cells, it was an in vitro study, human endothelial cells, when bathed, that's the verb from the study, when bathed with Cardio Miracle, began expression of endothelial nitric oxide in less than a second. In less than a second. And that expression of endothelial nitric oxide, that is the nitric oxide, thank you, Gabe, that's produced by your endothelial cells, the interior lining of your vasculature, as Chris said, that expression continues for over 24 hours. This
Wow.
was a shock to the scientific world in the nitric oxide realm, because Dr. Malinsky, with over 200 published articles to his name, said there's been no experience with any other supplement, any other substance that would create that 24+ hour expression of nitric oxide from endothelial cells.